Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the A segment of episode 32 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation Archive. We begin this segment with a computer archive being booted up and a file known as the creation of adults being selected. A narrator talks as scenes from this file are shown on screen, and the narrator's voice sounds like a mechanized version of number one's voice. According to this narrator, the world was originally inhabited by kids and not adults. Kids lived in simple tree houses and spent every day doing whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. But over the course of time, kids eventually grew bored, and they ended up creating adults to carry out menial tasks for them, such as preparing food and building tree houses that were bigger and more elaborate than the simple tree houses that they originally lived in. Eventually, the kids wanted the adults to build a giant treehouse, a treehouse that was so big that all the kids in the world could live in this particular treehouse. Now, naturally, a treehouse in a giant tree would take a lot of time and effort to fully construct. And so the adults had to work long hours and for a long period of time in order to fully construct this treehouse. And the kids didn't really show the adults any respect as the adults worked on this treehouse. Not to mention, the adults also had their time, the time of the adults was also used fulfilling the other menial tasks for kids. And so the adults never really had time for their own, and they became very exhausted. Not to mention, they grew more and more angry as the kids disrespected them. Eventually, there was one adult named Mr. Wigglestein, and Mr. Wigglestein was exhausted from a day of fulfilling his objectives. And the kid that Mr. Wigglestein was with wanted to play horsey, but Mr. Wigglestein said that he was too exhausted to play horsey for this particular day. The kid did not take this answer well and proceeded to continue to irritate Mr. Wigglestein. Mr. Wigglestein eventually lost his temper and he started to spank the kid. This was actually the first instance of spanking, or the first time spanking had occurred in history, according to this narrator. Mr. Wigglestein was put on trial by the kids, and the kids decided to ban adults from the giant treehouse. And so the adults did leave, and they went on to build their own society. Oh, and as a little visual detail, when the lights go out after Mr. Wigglestein's trial, Mr. Wigglestein takes on a familiar form, the form of father. But as for the adults, after they were banished from the kids' giant treehouse, the adults created their own society, which was called Cleveland. And the adults, the adults had built a prosperous society in Cleveland, and eventually the adults had created something of their own. The adults ended up creating toys, and kids could not resist these toys, but the adults wanted money in exchange for the toys, so the adults had the kids do the menial tasks that the kids had the adults do originally, so the roles were reversed. The kids, however, did not take too kindly to this because they figured the adults were creations of the kids, so the creations of the adults should be, the kids thought that they were entitled to the creations of adults because they, the kids, were the creators of the adults. But they didn't want to incur the wrath of spanking, so they had to figure out another way to acquire the toys. So what the kids did were they decided to use water balloons to try and bomb the coffee shops of Cleveland because coffee is the main energy source of adults. Unfortunately for the kids, though, their primitive technology was no match for the refined and sturdy structures of coffee shops in Cleveland. And eventually, the adults decided to counterattack. Mr. Wigglestein actually came up with an idea that the adults called the Big Time Out. And what happened was the adults invaded the giant treehouse with these machines, which you could essentially say that they're spanking machines, essentially. So they used these spanking machines to invade the giant treehouse. And while the kids did try to fight back, the spanking machines proved to have the upper hand. And so all of the kids in the world were forced to retreat. So they all gathered together in a spacecraft and they left Earth after, or just before the adults destroyed the giant treehouse. And the adults cheer as they managed to cause the kids to retreat from Earth. So the kids ended up landing on the moon, and over time the spacecraft grew as the foundation of a treehouse that grew on the moon. So the kids spent their days on the moon doing what they did before the adults were created. And the adults pretty much lived on Earth by themselves. But over time, the kids grew to miss the Earth. Yes, the kids eventually grew to miss Earth and all of its various locations and the activities they were able to do on Earth, while the adults ended up missing having kids do menial tasks for them. So eventually, the adult ambassadors arrived on the moon base and offered a solution where adults and kids could live together without hostility or animosity. The adult ambassadors suggested that they form groups of adults and kids and call these groups families, and these families all live together, and the idea was for kids and adults to live in harmony. And so the kids did willingly return to Earth, and these family groups were formed. And yeah, the family groups were formed after the kids returned to Earth. Suddenly, though, the narrator starts to go on a rant of some kind. The narrator is much more frantic now in what the narrator is saying. Yes, the narrator starts to say things in a much more frantic tone. And according to the narrator, the adults decided to betray the kids by creating schools and using the schools to erase the kids' memories of the fact that the kids were the creators of adults, and to try and make the kids subservient to adults. And this frantic narration starts to become more and more frantic to the point where it starts to make less and less sense as it continues to go on. And we start to get the scenes start to show various various flashes, various quick and you'll miss it moment scenes are starting to play at a rapid speed now as the narrator becomes more and more frantic. And eventually, though, we hear someone calling out to Mr. Uno, as in Nigel Uno, because, there's a few scenes showing a teacher who's trying to call out to Mr. Uno, referring to Nigel Uno, number one, and eventually the teacher silences number one. The scene then shows number one in a classroom. He's holding several papers as a report, and he's holding a hollow can that he's talking through. And yes, we find out that this creation of adults file is actually one of number one's conspiracy theories. Number one was supposed to give a class report, but yes, this was not at all the subject that he was supposed to talk about. The teacher outright tells number one that his report has nothing to do with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, although number one rhetorically questions if it really doesn't, and he refers to his teacher as Mr. Freibingle. Number 2, however, actually liked the report. Number 2 is in number 1's class, and number 2 said he liked the fight between the machines of kids and adults. Mr. Freibingle, however, says that he likes it when his students actually follow their textbooks for creating their reports. And so he gives number 1 a double F minus. Yes, he gives number 1 a double F minus in response for the paper that he, or the report that he handed in. Soon enough, the bell rings, so number 1, number 2, and the rest of the students proceed to leave the classroom. While number 2 tries to assure number 1 that Mr. Freibingle doesn't know what he's talking about. Number 2 enjoyed the report just fine. But after all the students are gone, Mr. Freibingle picks up an apple, but we soon see that this apple is actually a communicator, and Mr. Freibingle is talking to someone on the other end. We don't hear who the someone is, but Mr. Freibingle says, "They know." And that's how we end this segment. So this segment is actually the third art segment of the series. So as a quick refresher, or for anyone who might not have seen the previous art segment recap and thoughts videos, the art segments are segments within Codename Kids Next Door where the staff and crew members of the series deviate from the traditional narratives of a story and they tell a story that doesn't follow the traditional narrative. Now, in Season 1, it was Operation The Fly. In Season 2, it was Operation Report. So for this season, it's Operation Archive. And again, as a refresher, or for the sake of those who might not have seen the other art segment recap and thoughts videos, there are 6 art segments in total, the same number as the number of seasons for Codename Kids Next Door. However, these art segments are not all one per season. There's actually 2 art segments in Season 4, while Season 5 does not have an art segment. And now that I think about it, I think half of the art segments actually have the school setting. Like this segment, Operation Archive, was actually in the school setting since it was number 1's report. And I do believe 2 more art segments are also within the school setting. So yeah, that's a pretty interesting detail that I only just realized as I was going through rewatching the segment for this recap and thoughts video. Now, as for this segment is actually a parody. Well, then again, most entries in the series are a parody or an homage to some other work of fiction. But in the case of this segment, Operation Archive, this is a parody or an homage to a segment called The Second Renaissance, which is from the Animatrix. Truth be told, I actually never seen the Animatrix, at least as of the recording of this video. I haven't actually watched the Animatrix, but that's apparently that is what it's a parody of. I have yet to see the source material for this parody myself, but yeah, for anyone who's curious, that's the work of fiction that inspired this particular segment. And that's right, yes, I might as well talk about the ending, because yes, near the end of the segment, we're shown that this is actually a report that number 1 has to give, except it has nothing to do with the topic that he was supposed to talk about, and it comes off as just one of number 1's many conspiracy theories. But the end of the segment had Mr. Freibingle contacting someone and telling him, like Mr. Freibingle said, "They know." Now, I might as well just bring it up now, but yeah, they never actually follow up on that ending for Operation Archive. In fact, there are certain entries later on in the series that actually contradict what was depicted in Operation Archive. Like, for example, Mr. Wigglestein in the report was pretty much father. Or yeah, they don't come right out and say it, but yeah, they all but outright say that Mr. Wigglestein is father, and they explain this as father's origins. And yes, a later entry actually clarifies father's true origins, and I don't want to give it away just yet for the sake of those who might not have seen that particular entry for whatever reason, but yes, let's just say father's actual last name is not Wigglestein. Again, I don't want to give it away just yet, but yeah, Wigglestein is not actually father's last name. And some fans, though, have tried to come up with some explanations for what Wigglestein actually is. I'll talk more about that once I cover the recap and thoughts video for the entry that clarifies father's true origins or clarifies father's true identity. But yeah, besides that detail, other entries in the series do clarify, yeah, kids growing into adults is kind of the norm. And actually, the series finale actually offers a different explanation for what adulthood is than what number one's report had mentioned. So again, I don't want to give away that detail just yet because it happens in the series finale, but we will eventually talk about that. So yeah, just for the sake of clarifying, even though the ending suggests otherwise, later entries in the series do seem to suggest that the creation of adults report really was just one of number one's many conspiracy theories. So yeah, I might as well just bring that up now. And some might say this is probably one of the more notable examples of continuity hiccups in the series, at least with the fact that the ending of Operation Archive didn't end up leading to anything anyway. That's what some consider to be a notable continuity hiccup. But otherwise, there isn't really too much else to talk about for this particular segment. But yeah, I will say this segment certainly does make me curious in seeing what the Animatrix is like. So I may end up eventually watching that particular work of fiction someday in the future. And otherwise, yeah, like I said, the ending didn't really lead up to anywhere. And I do remember after finishing up the series, I kind of realized that it was like, oh yeah, they never really followed up on that ending. Not that I really have any issues with that, mind you, because I ended up being very interested in what Father's actual origins were. So we'll talk about that eventually, but yeah, I didn't mind too much about the ending of Operation Archive not going anywhere, because I ended up liking Father's true origins more in comparison. But this is still an interesting segment overall. It continues the art segment tradition of the series. And like I said, Season 4 actually has 2 art segments, so we'll be sure to cover those once we eventually reach Season 4. But for now, there we go for this particular segment. So as of this video, we've now discussed the A segment of episode 32 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.